They asked us what had happened, and we didn't know. It was the driver of the Jeep and the driver of the car coming the other way who laid out the facts. Without intrigue, their stories agreed. The police were happy about that. The scene was ugly enough not to be reconciling different versions of the story, settling disputes. To what extent the Jeep driver was ever faulted or not faulted for pulling out in front of them, the issue never surfaced. It was only in a later retelling of the story, from the Cadillac's angle, that the Jeep's sudden appearance was described as a contributing factor. The night of the accident, the old Cadillac's overall poor handling was all the explanation the cops needed. Driving fast, they hit a wet spot, lost control. When the ambulance arrived, the emergency team extracted Tony and Carol from the car. Phyllis stayed in the thick of it, and may have grabbed Carol's belongings or accompanied her gurney to the ambulance. As a bystander with no valuable skills to offer, I drifted for no practical reason up onto the left. The complicated rescue scene out of my jurisdiction, I figured. I may have thought it would help to have someone on the high ground as a lookout and a set of flare. From the top, I noticed a weird orange-gray glow laying low over the horizon back over the city. Almost like a dome, but it wasn't even 3 in the morning. Down over the lowlands of the more distant delta regions downriver, the night sky was strangely lit as if from low-hovering UFOs, or oil platforms in the Gulf. A huge container ship passed 500 feet away in the pitch dark in the dead center of the Mississippi. Amazing to me that something so big could pass without a sound. Then Tony's voice rang out, from down the hill by the road. On a gurney, while being rolled in the direction of the ambulance, Tony woke suddenly and yelled out a frantic blasting shout for help that sounded like a faulty air horn. What happened? Oh! God help me, fuck! And then he seemed to try to say Carol, but garbled the second syllable, and then remained quiet. The doors closed behind him and the ambulance took off downriver. One of the medics put a hand on his bloodied forehead and encouraged him to lay his head back, which he did. Eventually, Phyllis looked around and called from down below. In another minute, we were back in her car and on our way to the hospital. The hospital, as it turned out, was less than a mile away. We had driven right past it on our final unfinished leg. What's the point in going? It's out of our hands now, I was thinking. Of course, it's what you do. You follow your friends at the hospital when they've been hurt. For a while, they wouldn't tell us anything. Phyllis eventually disappeared to demand a report. In a padded vinyl chair in the waiting room, I slept while waiting for news. The futility of worrying too much was clear, especially now in the safe belly of professional help. Add to that a gauze of fatigue and mild drunken bewilderment, and you have the recipe for a man passed out in the waiting room waiting to be told something. In time, the automatic doors opened and birds were chirping. When the doors closed again, there were frequent sneaker squeaks and the muffled sound of urgent talking down a hall somewhere. Phyllis was at the other end of the admittance area talking to a doctor. She was upset. In another second, bawling. Her red eyes and damp cheeks were clearly visible from 40 feet. She lifted her hands to her face and shook her head while walking slowly through a far door with the nurse who the doctor had called over to them. Then she disappeared again. When she reappeared sometime later, she approached. You should get ready to go. We'll leave in a few minutes. While I considered what getting ready to go meant, she walked away again, but then returned with her keys in her hand. Not speaking, she led our party of 2 across the bright morning pavement toward a crookedly parked Chrysler. What's going on, Phyllis? I asked, beginning to fear the answer. How are they? I continued 6 steps later. I saw you talking to a doctor. No response. Phyllis walked in a daze, recovering from some kind of heavy blow and not collected yet. I could wait until told. In the car, she sat still with her hands and keys in her lap and gathered herself to start talking. As she began, the tears came back and she cried and talked overlappingly. "Oh, Mike," she started slowly, choking on a sob. "You're sweet." She then cried a little more. "Sweet?" "Oh, Mike," Phyllis began again. "He didn't make it." "He? He who? He Tony? Or he?" "Who?" I asked, feeling a pang of queasiness from her lack of specificity at crunch time. "Who didn't make it?" She cried a little more and hiccuped. "Anthony didn't make it." "Anthony didn't make it?" "Anthony didn't make it," I repeated to myself in a slow internal slideshow to translate the statement. Tony was dead. While the first bit of news sank in, Phyllis began talking more quietly and said the doctors tried operating for a second time around 4:30, but that the operation failed. Severe head trauma, and his spleen had ruptured. He lost too much blood too quickly in and out. He died at 5. The outflow of details held my attention for a minute, but we were missing something. "Okay, so Tony died. What about Carol?" "Carol?" Phyllis started as though it were a secondary subject. "Carol's fine." "Yeah, Carol, how is she?" I demanded hungrily, not hearing Phyllis's answer, nerves somewhat frayed and misfiring. Instead of responding to my stress-induced outburst right away, Phyllis pulled her Chrysler out of the front parking lot of Ochsner Hospital and onto Jefferson Highway. "Take it easy there, Mike. Carol's fine." "What's fine mean?" I asked her, annoyed by an irresponsible lack of details. An exasperating exchange on top of an emotionally confusing situation. "She's fine. She's alive. She's got whiplash and she's sick to her stomach, but she's fine." "Really?" "She's not hurt, Michael, and neither is the babe. They made it. They were strapped in. Carol's neck is strained, and they're going to keep her there until Sunday, but she's okay. She's a very lucky girl." In the glare of the morning sky and growing traffic on Jefferson Highway, Phyllis speaking loudly, almost angrily, was difficult to listen to, especially since Carol was fine. The accident was bad, true, but Carol was fine. A tragedy with what happened to Mr. Tony. But Christ, the situation not nearly as bad as it could have been. Phyllis said little on the drive back, though swore at a few bewildered commuters after cutting them off. Everything was different all of a sudden. In the early morning of what day? It was Friday, I gathered loosely after counting back in my head to recognizable parts of the previous afternoon. The blocks and miles across town rolled by like small foreign countries. A ride through a strange place I'd never seen before. A new angle heading in a new direction at a new time of day. North on South Carrollton, an hour before the crunch of rush hour.